Hi, and welcome to another watercolour lesson. Today I'm going to paint a picture of a wonderful summer's day off the coast of South Devon, and I'm going to show you how to create the effect of sparkle on water using masking fluid in a very loose and in a very free and easy way, so we end up that wonderful light bouncing off the water. Right, I'm now going to start to prepare the board before I actually start the painting. I've stretched some watercolour paper. I've stretched 140 pounds Bockingford knot surface, and I want to make certain that I'm going to work within correct horizontals and correct verticals, and to do that I'm going to use a T-square, and I'm just going to put my right angles into the corner so that I've got a nice horizontal to work to. Just going to do top and bottom and the sides. And I'm also, when I've done this, going to add some masking tape edges to the sides of the lines here. And I'm making certain also that I'm using low tack masking tape. There's two types, there's low tack and there's high tack. The low tack means that you can take it from the paper without it tearing. What's nice with the masking tape is at the end of the painting, or indeed as you're progressing the painting, you can take the masking tape off and you have like an instant border to it, an instant mount, which helps you to assess how the painting's progressing without all the rubbish that seems to accumulate around the edges of the painting from the paint or the pencil marks, or at times even a shopping list. I'm now going to progress to the drawing, and it's very, very simple for the painting that we're working on today, which is the sparkle on water. And I'm going to do a very, very simple system of composition and layout. I'm going to work in thirds. So I'm going to divide, not on the paper, I'm going to divide on the gum strip approximately thirds along the top edge and along the sides, because I'm going to work today on approximately 2/3 sky and 1/3 water. I'm not going to measure it. If I measure it, there's a danger that it becomes too mathematical and we seem to lose a little bit of the flow of the painting. I'm also going to use the T-square again to make certain that my horizon for the water is absolutely straight. I don't like to see watercolour horizons like that, or when they haven't quite got to the end of the paper and you leave a little bit over here. Looks slightly strange, it should be a pile of boats. So let's just get the horizon line in. Just a little bit above that third I'm going to put it, so I'm going to put some headlands in later. There we go, so a nice straight line running across there. And I'm going to put my far distant headland on just below where that first third is. Well, there's the distant headland, and there's a closer headland to us, so I'm just going to lift that one. Very simple drawing. I'm not going to draw too much. I don't need to because I'm going to paint. I'm just going to put a little bit of line there across, and that gives me the bottom part of that nearest headland. And that, for this particular image, is all the drawing you need to do. Now it's time to put the masking fluid on this painting, because this painting is about sparkle and the light on the water just off the South Devon coast. I've created a range of brushes which anybody can create themselves to put the masking fluid on the paper. What I've done is to get some really cheap artists' oil brushes, actually oil acrylic. And what I've managed to do with them is to put some masking fluid into a little, it's a creme brulee dish actually, but I put the masking fluid into the creme brulee dish, and I've pushed the brush into the wet masking fluid and held it there for about 10 minutes. And as I've taken out, it's retained this wonderful shape, which for this one, for example, you can see I could twist it over the surface of the paper, and it gives me a series of sort of broken marks of masking fluid going onto the paper. And this is what we're going to do in a moment. We're going to put the masking fluid onto the paper to create this effect of sparkle on water, which is of course what this painting's about. And of course, I'm sure many of you are aware of a really useful tool, which is a colour shaper. I think they're originally designed for blending pastel, but they're great for putting the masking fluid on because you don't have to clean them, you can let them dry and just peel off the masking fluid. These, of course, as you use them, they will change, the shapes evolve and give you a whole variety of marks that you can make with them. Masking fluid to work and to be successful has to go onto dry paper. It sits on the surface of the paper, protecting the paper. But if it sits on the surface of the paper, and unfortunately the paper isn't dry, it's not bone dry, it's slightly damp, it actually sinks into the paper. And when you try to peel it off, it rips the paper, it tears. If it's dry, it will sit on the surface of the paper, and as you peel it off, as you remove it, you'll be safe. So always make certain that you've used, or you're going to apply it to absolutely bone dry paper. You can, of course, put the masking fluid on top of an already existing wash of watercolour. But once again, you must make certain that that watercolour wash is absolutely dry, otherwise it will tear. Sometimes you can buy masking fluid that's a little bit like double cream or slightly even thicker than that, and I find that when you put that onto the paper, it's not that successful because it doesn't tend to move, it just sort of stays there looking at you. So I will often water the masking fluid down so that it resembles that of, say, single cream. You don't always have to do it, so always check before you apply it. You can water it down up to about 50% water. That's enough. And I'm going to start putting the masking fluid round about that third so it comes under or below that distant headland, because I want to put a little bit of splash of light just in front of that distant headland. And I'm going to start putting the masking fluid on with one of the grotty brushes, as I call them. And you'll notice as I'm putting the brush to the paper with the masking fluid, I'm also twisting it and moving it. If you don't twist it, if you don't move it round, you end up with a repeat pattern, and that looks very, very unnatural. So as I'm putting it on, I'm putting a little twist to the brush. And in the centre where the light is, that's where we're going to have the bulk of the masking fluid. That's where the bulk of the light's going to come off the paper. As we go to the edges, either side of the masking fluid in the centre, I'm just going to reduce the level of masking fluid. I'm going to make it thinner and slightly smaller marks. You'll see as I do this. Look, I can still use this tool. And now I'm sort of tapping away from the edge. And I would suggest you don't keep looking at it. If you do, before you know it, you'll suddenly be seeing the pattern of a starfish or a donkey's head. And we don't want that. We want to make it look natural. So as we're tapping the masking fluid on, just look away briefly. It's masking fluid. What can go wrong? If it's in the wrong place, let it dry. You can peel it off. I quite often see paintings where people have used masking fluid and they've sprinkled it on like fairy dust, hoping that something magical will happen. I think you really have to be very, very careful with the masking fluid when you apply it and the planning. Don't think of it as protecting the paper. Think of it as paint. Think of it as white paint. In this case, white acrylic, white oil. Because the mark that you apply at this stage with the masking fluid tends to be the mark you're going to end up with at the end. If there's any danger of you splashing any of the masking fluid as you're flicking it on or tapping it on, you can, of course, protect parts of the painting. You can use some junk mail's always good, or you get a little bit of kitchen roll and we put that in place and get some coins and just hold it there. You might even try at some stage flicking with the masking fluid, and if you can get the angle right, you don't end up with a tiny little round sort of splash. You end up with a little stroke, which of course is ideal because it looks like the tops of the waves or the swell in the sea that's just catching the sunlight. With the colour shapers, I can actually use these to be a little bit more precise. And for example, I'm going to put some masking fluid, I'm going to put some light under that headland that's nearest to us. Really nice and bright. You can use a hairdryer to dry this, but put it on quite a low heat. And what I would suggest is that you work about 18 inches, 2 foot away, low heat, and just move the hairdryer gently backwards and forwards. If you get too close to it, it seems to weld itself to the paper. So I'm going to spend a little bit more time now just putting the rest of this masking fluid on. Right, now we're going to come to the exciting bit. I think we're going to start to put some colour on here. I've already laid some of my colours out. I'm using some permanent rose, some indigo and some French ultramarine, and I'm going to work on the sky first. I'm going to be using a number 10 Bellinskого sable brush. I'm going to do what I describe as the interiors of the clouds first. Now, I haven't mixed the colours, but what I want to do is to apply some water to the paper, let it soak into the paper, and then I will mix my colours, and hopefully under the lights here this will be damp enough for me to drop the interior colours into the clouds and let them spread out naturally, give me a really nice naturalistic looking edge to the clouds. So nice clean water. In fact, the secret I think to nice fresh crisp watercolours is clean water. 1 to wash your brush in, 1 to mix your colours in, or 2 to wash your brushes in, 2 to mix your colours in. And a very, very simple mantra. If you wouldn't put a goldfish in it, don't paint with it. So let's get some clean water and just apply that onto the paper. Quite loose. It's on stretched paper, so it shouldn't cockle up too much. And I'm kind of doing it in a sort of V shape over where the light is. Same sort of approach. Nice big brush full of water. Clean water, soak that paper. And look, I've got a sort of V coming here and a sort of arrow coming there. Guess where I want you to look? Round about there, round about where that third is. If it goes slightly over the headlands, doesn't matter. Now I can mix my colour. Going to use some of that permanent rose. Going to use the French ultramarine. I'm going to use a little bit of the indigo. Now that's a bit strong, so we add some water to it. Now, I'm looking at where that water was already applied, and I think it's ready for me to drop some paint in. And I'm going to drop it in round about the middle here, so that it's got plenty of room to spread out. So let's see what happens. Go to the top. There we go, it's doing its own thing. Now, I'm about to say something very strange in a DVD about painting. I'm not actually painting. It's doing it for me. I'm just encouraging it where to go. Giving me plenty of space for that colour to spread out. And I'm just using the tip of the brush, just dropping the colour in, and I'm kind of encouraging it. I'm just going to put a little bit more blue, I think, at the top there, just to change. I don't really want the same colour all the way through. There we are. That's quite nice. Over here, add a little bit more water to that, and you can see it's blooming. I get quite frustrated at times when I see people new to watercolour putting colour onto a piece of paper and then going and lifting it off, putting it on and lifting it off. Give it a chance to breathe, give it a chance to do something. Something magical happens with watercolour. Look at this lovely shape here forming. And as I say, I'm not painting. It's doing it for me. I'm using French ultramarine because it's a wonderful blue, and it's a blue that granulates, so it gives me a little bit of texture in the middle of the clouds here. There we are. That's quite nice. Now I'm going to make the clouds near to the horizon slightly paler. I'll don't forget that as you put the watercolour on, it's going to dry paler anyway. Some watercolours dry up to 1/3 of their initial strength when you put them on. They become paler. So when you're putting it on, if it looks a little bit too strong, see what happens. Don't be in too much of a hurry to lift it off. I'm just moving my head so I can see where the paper is still damp. Now it's dried a little bit over here, so if I keep moving along here with this colour, I will get a different effect, and I don't want that. So I'm going to go back with some clean water and just add some detail there. I think there's a bit of a gap here, so I'm going to add, I think, a few little clouds here. This is a sort of nice sunny day off the coast with a little bit of wind just lifting your hair as you walk along the beach. There we are. You need to allow, of course, that water to get into the paper. If you think about the paper and you think about putting the water on, otherwise if the water just sits on the surface of the paper like a flat bubble, and when you add colour to it, it will just sit on the surface of the bubble and won't touch the paper. So if you let it soak into the paper, you'll end up with something that will accept the paint and looks far more interesting. I think we'll just put a little bit of a cloud moving up there. Might be a sunny day, we'll have a few clouds in it. Now I'm happy with that. I'm going to let it dry naturally. I'm not going to use a hairdryer. The reason I don't want to use the hairdryer is, as I've already said, we can end up with colours losing up to 1/3 of their strength as they dry naturally. With a hairdryer, the application of heat means we're actually evaporating the water off, and of course the water has the pigment in suspension. So if the colour is right at this stage, let it dry naturally. If we apply the hairdryer and use the hairdryer to dry the colour, we actually can evaporate more pigment from the paper, and we end up with slightly less brilliant colours. They become duller and flat. So if you can let it dry naturally, I would. I'm now going to put a little bit of colour close to the horizon. I'm going to use some cadmium orange and a little bit of permanent rose, just to warm it slightly, because it can look a little bit cold out there. So, same brush, size 10, a little bit of the permanent rose, a little bit of the cad orange, not too strong. And you might notice, as I'm actually using the brush, I'm rolling it to make certain I keep a nice point to it. So I've got a nice point there. And just drop it in. It's slightly damp in parts, which is just what we want. If it's too strong on the paper, well, you can always go into the jar, add some water, just drop some of that colour in. And I'm picking up the underside of some sort of distant clouds here. Be quite nice if I can take that along to the end. That's good. A little bit here. And the tops of the clouds kind of form for me there. There we go. Makes sense, the cleaner of the two waters. There we go. It's almost imperceptible it's there, but it just adds that little bit of warmth that we want, which works so well with the rest of the painting. Now, as before, I'm going to let that dry naturally. I'm not going to use the hairdryer because I'm happy with the colour and I'm happy with the tone. It's paler because we've got a bit of distance to it, so I'm just going to let that dry. The next stage is we can actually now paint the blue part of the sky. This is dry, so I'm happy now to go into the, as I say, the blue part of the sky. I'm going to use a colour, a blue, that a lot of people probably haven't used for skies before. It's called Winsor Blue Green Shade. It's a staining blue. It's not like the French ultramarine, which you can lift out months after the paint has dried. It's a staining blue, so we have really only one opportunity to get it right. I've squeezed some colour out, size 10 brush again. I'm not going to actually wet the paper before I put the blue on. I'm going to work the paper or work the paint around the clouds, and I'm going to create the sort of white edges to the clouds. We've done the middles, now we do the edges. Now this blue is a wonderful, wonderful blue, but there is a danger that if you put it on too strongly, it looks very, very false. So I would rather have a paler version of this, and if I need to, I can go back into it or onto it later with another coat. So that should give me enough. I'm going to start top left. I'm going to move across the painting, and I will stop at these various points in the clouds, and I will soften some of the edges and crisp some of the edges off as I move through. But I've got a plan as I'm moving through so that I keep like a wet bead of colour moving around the painting so I don't get any drying edges. You have to do it quite quickly. So let's have a go. There we go. Now already we've got some edges forming which might look a little false. So add a little bit of colour to that edge there so it's going to remain wet for longer. Into some water, clean water, and let's just soften along that edge. There you go. So we've got some nice naturalistic cloud edges forming up there. It's wet, once again. It's painting it for me. Here we go. I'm dancing the brush across, creating some sort of cloud tops here. And here we are again, we've got some hard edges forming. I'd like to soften some of those. So wet that edge. So we've got something to work to when we come back. Just take the excess off. Into the clean water. Remember the goldfish? If you wouldn't put a goldfish in it, don't paint with it. There we are, we soften that edge again, soften it there, and we can go back into it and take this nice damp edge now. There we go. We've got the board at a slight angle so the colour's running down. You can, of course, with these stretch boards, you can actually lift the paper up if you want to and move the colour around. I often do that if I've got a large painting I'm working on. Something like an A1 is really great. You can actually pour colour onto it and lift the board and move it around. Something you can't do with unstretched paper. There we go, so we've got some nice edges there. Not far to go. Over here. Now you can use some kitchen roll if you want to lift some colour off. What I would suggest if you do is that you don't crumple it up. You turn the kitchen roll into a little absorbent chisel. I will show you. So, just put my brush down. Kitchen roll. Don't crumple it up because you won't see what part of the kitchen roll is actually touching the paper itself. But if you turn it into a little paper chisel, like that, it's origami. We can see that nice little edge there. You can see here I can lift off and be far more accurate where I'm lifting my colour. So I can create some edges there if I want to. Just take a little bit out of there. And that is the sky done. I'm going to let that dry now.